As he said, my name's Rebecca Taylor. I work at the Federal Point Historic Preservation Society at the Federal Point History Center. I hope you all know that that includes Curry Beach. It is not Carolina Beach. We actually cover from the Rocks to Monkey Junction, and we do the history of the entire area. I don't say the island because, of course, this isn't technically an island. It's a peninsula, and we cover the peninsula. So we appreciate all that Curry Beach does to preserve their history. We appreciate working hand in hand with them, and I hope you all will come visit us at the History Center. There are some brochures on the very back table about our society and also some about the history. We have history flyers for Carolina Beach, Curry Beach, and Seabreeze. And I brought the Curry Beach ones, and as long as they last, you're welcome to take them. When they asked me to do this presentation, I thought I was doing it for some third graders. I also did not know that Punky and Brenda and David were going to be here, all of whom know more history about Curry Beach than I do. So I'm going to ask you all to chime in when I get it wrong. I'm still learning. I've only been down here about 15 years. I've been in Wilmington about 40 years. But as people say, that does not make me a local. I was not born on the beach. I didn't live here my whole life, and I'm still learning about the history. So we're going to start out. A lot of this was sort of aimed for the kids, but I think you'll enjoy it anyway. This is Hans Christian Curry and his wife Ellen. They are both from Denmark. He was a mariner, a sailor. He came to North Carolina. His ship came to North Carolina. He loved it, and he went back to Denmark and married Ellen. She was a member of the royal household of Denmark. And then they came to Wilmington, and he had a ship's chandlery, which is a grocery store for ships, providing stores for ships in Wilmington, but eventually fell in love with Carolina Beach and then Curry Beach. We're going to start out with the very, very first vacationers at Curry Beach. We do not have any evidence that there were actually Indian villages on Federal Point. What we do have is some artifacts. It's believed that the Cape Fear Indians lived on the freshwater rivers inland a little bit. But in the summer, when it was hot and buggy, they came to the beach. And we have found lots of evidence of temporary summertime type villages or houses that the Indians came. They did oystering, clamming, fishing, and basically came down to the coast in the summertime to get away from the heat and the bugs. So that's the local Indians called the Cape Fear Indians. The first European to visit this area, the Cape Fear River, was Verrazano. He was actually sailing for France. And it's interesting that we didn't end up part of France, but he came in 1524 and sailed up and down the coast and technically discovered the Cape Fear River. Whoops, I went too far. This is the first Spaniard who visited the Cape Fear. He actually came ashore about Hilton Head in South Carolina, but worked his way up into the Cape Fear. Again, didn't stay, just wrote about it after he left. The first Englishman who came was William Hilton, and in Wilmington, you still see there was a Hilton Plantation, and there's an area of Wilmington, just north of Wilmington, called Hilton. He came in 1663. He came twice. The first time he came down with some New Englanders who were thinking about settling down here. But they didn't stay, and we don't know why. They came down intending to settle and left, and nobody knows quite why. He then went down to Barbados and got some backers and came back and did more exploration. They also didn't stay. They checked it out and left. We do have pirates. Our very own Stede Bonnet, who was actually a rich plantation owner from the Caribbean, who decided it would be fun to be a pirate, bought his own ship, didn't capture it, and went sailing. And he connected with Blackbeard, and Blackbeard sort of taught him how to be a pirate. They both went in and out of the Cape Fear multiple times. Stede Bonnet actually was captured in the Cape Fear River on the other side. He had brought his ship in to do repairs, and he had sort of run it aground on the far side of the Cape Fear River, and was captured and taken to Charleston, South Carolina, where he was hung. I know that pirates are exciting and fun, but they mostly had very tragic ends because they were, in fact, criminals. Hurricanes. We're going to talk more about hurricanes towards the end, but we need to talk about New Inlet. New Inlet is basically where the aquarium, below where the aquarium is now, was water. At one point, it was as much as a mile of open water. It was formed from a hurricane in 1761, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's not there anymore in a little bit. But it plays a vital role in the history of this area. We actually had lighthouses. We had the Federal Point Lighthouse, which was 3 different lighthouses, actually. The first one was built as early as 1816, when there was nothing down here, and it was to light the way for New Inlet, so that the mariners could find it and come and go through it. That one burned. We don't have any pictures. Photography didn't exist back then. There are no photographs. The second one was built in 1837 after the first one burned down. That is actually a painting of it that was made by one of the soldiers at Fort Fisher, because it was right where Fort Fisher is. The interesting thing about the second one, the colored one in the middle, is that it was basically inside of Fort Fisher. The commander of Fort Fisher ordered it torn down because the blockade, the Union ships were using it to sight. They knew how tall it was, and so they could use it to sight their guns when they were shooting into the fort. So it was ordered torn down, and we actually have records that one young man was actually killed by the lighthouse falling on him. Because at Fort Fisher, there's a letter of condolence to his parents that says the lighthouse fell on him. Actually, during the Civil War, all of North Carolina's lighthouses were either torn down or moved away from the coast, because they didn't want the Union to be able to use them for sighting and for navigation. The final lighthouse doesn't look a lot like a lighthouse. It was a house, a 2-story wooden house with a light on top. It was built right after the Civil War, the next year, and it was lit as a navigation until 1877. It was then decommissioned because Bald Head, they had relit Bald Head. Bald Head wasn't bright enough to go all the way out Frying Pan Shoals, so it has a varied history of being on and off and using and not using, and so that when they got Bald Head back up, they decommissioned. It actually burned to the ground. Now, I have heard Richard Lawrence, who's retired from the archaeology lab, says those iron feet are still somewhere on the grounds of the aquarium, but they're so far back in the bushes that it would take machetes and all kinds of stuff to get in to find them, and he can't tell me exactly where they are. If anybody would like to go spelunking in the brush around the aquarium and find them, we'd love to know. The other two lighthouses, it was a great mystery as to where exactly they were. Stanley South, who was the first curator of the Fort Fisher Museum and a great archaeologist, thought that at least one of them, the first one or the second one, was over on the river. We have since found out, in fact, that that's not true. They were right where they should have been. Battle Acre is exactly 1 acre. In 1815, when they bought the land to build the first lighthouse, the federal government bought 1 acre and built the lighthouse on it, right at where Battle Acre is. And so everybody thought, well, we know that, but where was the second one? Well, we have some records that say it was built on the foundation of the first one. And so in 2009, the state came down and did some archaeology and some digging, and sure enough, they found the base of the round lighthouse. It is still there on Battle Acre. They covered it back up because it is very early brick that's very soft. And open to the elements, it would break down really quick. And they want to preserve it. They don't want it open where people could chip off a brick and take it home. So they have it. It's on Battle Acre in the northeast corner from the monument. And the fort would like to find a way to exhibit it, but they've not found the money or a way to do that. What I would like to see is sort of a glass box built over it so people could actually see it, but they're involved in their new building right now, so that's what they're working on. But that's where our lighthouses were. The Civil War, as was mentioned, is a significant historical event to this area. It was because New Inlet was there, and they built the fort. It was considered the largest earthen fort in the world at the time, and it was built to protect New Inlet. The reason was the blockade runners, who were Confederates, were bringing supplies into the port of Wilmington. Wilmington was the last port to fall to the Union, and so it was the last lifeline of supplies: guns, uniforms, boots, food, to come into the Confederacy. So that's why Fort Fisher was so important. And this is another picture. Very little of Fort Fisher is left. What you see today is just a tiny piece. It actually extended along the ocean front for a mile. All of that is gone. It's been eroded and washed away. And where it was is now underwater. The reason it washed away was that some genius in the 1920s decided that the coquina rock that's in front of Ocean Dunes condominiums would be a good thing to put down to make a road. They wanted to build a road to Fort Fisher. And, it's all sand. And so they needed something firmer. So they mined that coquina rock. There's very little of it left, actually. And they put it in the roadbed. What that caused was the ocean current to completely change. And so all the erosion that's happening at Fort Fisher really starts in the 1920s. And between the 1920s and the 1950s, it just completely washed that fort away. So we learned some things about erosion, but the fort that face was a mile down the ocean front. And that's another picture of Fort Fisher. I'm sure you all have seen many pictures of Fort Fisher. The rocks. The rocks are a quiet little but very important structure to this area. The rocks were built after the Civil War by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It was the largest Army Corps of Engineers project ever attempted at that time. And basically, the federal government did not want to ever have to defend New Inlet again. So they closed it. They didn't want it to exist. Now, they also believed that if they closed it, the water coming down the Cape Fear River had two mouths. It could go out through New Inlet, or it could go all the way down to Bald Head and out through Southport. They thought if they closed off New Inlet, that would keep the water depth better for the original mouth at Bald Head. It sort of hadn't turned out that way, but that was the hope, that they could keep the volume of water higher and keep that open more down there. So you can now walk or drive from Carolina Beach to Bald Head. There is no inlet left anymore. It closed up about Hurricane Fran is about the last time that it was called Corn Cake Inlet for a little while, and it's closed completely now. Did you know that we almost had our very own national park? From the 1910s until the 1930s, there was a very strong movement in Wilmington to get Fort Fisher declared a national park. They went through a number of congressmen who promised it would happen. Various politicians from Wilmington went up and pleaded for it. And there is a whole train of newspaper articles and editorials and history of them trying to get it and maybe Bald Head turned into a national park. Think about what Curry Beach would be like today if we were sitting at the gates of a big national park. I'm not sure it would have been the best thing for this area. It certainly would have been different. This surprised me. I didn't know this when I started to do some Curry Beach research. But it was a 30-year campaign to get it to happen. This is a postcard that you don't see very much. This is Battle Acre before the monument was built. They commemorate from really 1900 on. There was a group of veterans in Wilmington and this area who were very determined to commemorate Fort Fisher and to mark it. And of course, Battle Acre today, where so many of our visitors go. Did you know that Curry Beach was once called Fort Fisher Sea Beach? I kind of like that name. It was originally called Fort Fisher Sea Beach, and it was begun by the Currys in 1913. This is the first announcement of that they are going to begin to build and sell property. The train. We had a train. The dock was on the river. Remember, everything came up and down the river. That's where transport was. There were not really roads. There was a sand track from Wilmington down here, but it was a long haul with a mule and wagon. So everything came up and down the river on boats. And the Kure-ous built a train to move their supplies and stuff back and forth from the river to the ocean, and also some tourists who came by steamboat. You can still see where the train came. John Gregory, who passed in the last year, went and found where the rail bed was. It's behind the ballpark, and you can still see where it came in from the river. So I think that's interesting if anybody wants to go find it. This is some publicity for the Roaring Resort of Fort Fisher Sea Beach. They had a pavilion with orchestras that played and dances to bring the tourists down. And these are some advertisements from some newspapers about the Kure Beach, or the Fort Fisher Sea Beach, and I just think they're fun. And this is an early swimming picture. I put this in for the kids because of the swimsuits that the kids are wearing in the ocean. In the early days, of course, everybody wore a whole lot more covering than they do today. Okay, Kure-ous Pier, an important, probably the most important structure in Kure Beach. This is an early picture. It was built in 1923, and we have just put a plaque for 100 years. So it is older than the town. This is another postcard of an early picture. These are a couple of other early pictures of the pier. We're real lucky because it was a tourist attraction, and so there are pictures. There are lots of things there aren't any pictures of, but these are a couple of pictures that are really interesting. And there we go. This is, Punky, who is this? This is Elsie, yeah, Lawrence. And his daughter at the entrance to the pier. Man, you should have been here last week. And you can see the tickets. And this is another one from probably the 50s. You can see not much other development around the pier, and the old pier house. And, oh, wait a minute, I missed one. I really love that aerial photo. I got it off of Facebook, and I'm not sure who took it. I stole it off of Facebook. But I just love the way it shows K Street and the pier, and I just think it's a neat picture. What we can do with photographs now that we have drones. And, well, things. And there's the ceremony we had with the whole Robertson, Curry and Robertson families for the 100th anniversary of the pier. This is the early Curry house, and also the General Frank Bond house. Those are the two earliest houses that we have any pictures of. We think they're about the earliest houses that were built. And the pillars. The pillars nearly drove me crazy. I wanted to know who built them and when. They are such an iconic landmark of Kure Beach. So I went hunting, and I searched through everything the public library had on Fort Fisher, everything that the Kafer Museum had on Fort Fisher, and everything that the local historians in Wilmington could tell me. I talked to two, and nobody could tell me anything. They just said it was a mystery. We speculated that they were built about the same time as the monument because they sort of structurally look like the monument, but we could not find any evidence of that. We finally talked to Punky, and he says they were there when the monument was dedicated in 19, and I've lost the date, 20, I can't remember.
Later.
Do you remember, Punky? What date did they dedicate the monument?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. It's in the 20s.
There, but I don't remember.
Yeah, but Punky says they were there then, so they must have been built before that. So we cannot, in fact, find any paper evidence of who built them or when. So that's the great mystery of Curry Beach. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Federal Point Methodist Church. It was the first church built down, well, it wasn't the first church built down here. It's the first church that we have pictures of and documentation of down here. It is called by some the Mother Methodist Church of North Carolina because it may very well be the oldest Methodist church building built in North Carolina. It stood where the cemetery is now, and believe it or not, it now stands as part of the Baptist Church. They moved it when Matsu took over the land and made it part of the buffer zone. They moved it and made it part of the Baptist Church. So the building does still stand. And of course, you all go by the cemetery every time you go up and down Dow Road. The Ethel Dow chemical plant is another really important part of the history, and it is gone. It is another piece of the mystery of Curry Beach in that you can't see anything. It is on the buffer zone land towards the river from Dow Road. There were concrete foundations as late as the 1960s, because Leslie talks about playing tennis on the concrete foundations back there. Of course, now the government will get you if you try to go back there and see it. I went probably 30 years ago hiking back there, and I did see it. But there's nothing left except piles of rubble. But it was a fairly important chemical plant. It took seawater and turned it into bromine. Bromine was added to gasoline because gasoline had lead in it, and the lead caused your engine to knock. Who remembers a knocking car engine? When you turned it off, it went, The kids would not remember that. I threw that in for the kids. But it was a major employer and a major economic engine to this area from the mid-1920s through the end of World War II. During World War II, they invented a thing that would stop the knocking, a different chemical. And of course, then we phased completely out of lead in gasoline and don't have lead in gasoline. So the plant was closed down after World War II, and it was abandoned for all intents and purposes. They moved what was the workers and some of the processes to Texas, to another plant they had on the coast in Texas. And these are just some really good pictures we got from Howard Hewitt, who grew up here, but his family followed the plant to Texas, and so he lived in Texas. But his father was the plant operations manager. He was the chief custodian. The plant, he kept the buildings up and the grounds up, and so he had a set of these pictures, and he very happily gave them to us before he passed away. It actually brought the seawater in from the ocean, put it in ponds to evaporate as much of the water out of as they could, and then ran it into that big plant. You can still see remnants of it today because the town has put up what I call the monument to the Dow Chemical Plant. It's part of the outtake or intake from the seawater, and it was put up to make sure that boats and swimmers don't get tangled up in what's left of the concrete piping where they brought the water in. So that's actually, you can see where that was today. Okay, let's talk a little bit about downtown Curry Beach, the first post office, and the barber shop. Who remembers the barber shop? Does anybody remember the, Punky does, Brenda does. Okay, those are a couple of neat pictures. World War II, another important part of Fort Fisher's history. A lot of people don't know that Fort Fisher was a major training base. It was a sub-base of Camp Davis, which was up at Holly Ridge, halfway to Jacksonville. And they taught the men how to shoot anti-aircraft artillery, guns that shot planes down. And they would come down here for 4 to 6 months to the Fort Fisher area and go out on the beach and shoot targets. Those targets were flown by women pilots because women weren't allowed to go in combat. Women could not go to Europe. They could not fly fighter planes. They were not allowed to be in combat. So instead, they used the women and old rickety planes that weren't good enough to fly in combat anymore to fly targets for the guys to learn how to shoot down airplanes. Right. So that's the story of Fort Fisher during World War II. The men shoot at the women while they learn how to do it. Yeah. These are some pictures that I got from the fort. John Mosley has done a lot of research into the history of World War II at Fort Fisher. Take a look at the barracks that are in these pictures, because we still have a lot of them today. After the war, they closed down Fort Fisher and sold off the barracks. And local people bought them and turned them into beach cottages. And we have counted about not quite 50, and we think there are more, we just aren't sure. But Punky and John Batson and a number of people have gone around and tried to identify which of these cottages were made from the old barracks. We would very much like to plaque some of these. They're well over 50 years old now. And so anybody that owns one, we would like to talk to you about putting a historic plaque. We don't have any that are plaqued yet. And we're really hoping to get some plaques on some of them. Oh, this thing is sensitive. There's a couple, just as samples. The one on the right is actually in Carolina Beach and has been raised up. So they've done many creative things with these old barracks from Fort Fisher. And that's another nice picture. There's nothing on the far side of K Street, as you can see. Only the pier and the strip on the side by the pier is there. I love aerial photographs. I think a lot of people, there's that building. Oh, there's that building. And so you can see how K Street looked at one time. Again, the left-hand side of K Street looks real different. The right-hand side looks very similar. But you can see what cottages and hotels looked like in downtown Curry Beach at that time. And this building was on the corner, right? Is where Jack Mackerel's is now. There's another shot of the right hand of K Street. And you can sort of tell the 50s by the cars. This is, now, I've heard two stories. I've heard this called the early town hall, not Bud and Joe's, but the one on the right. That's right now empty, I think. I've also been told that it was an ABC store in the front and the fire station in the back. So we would love to plaque it, but it has a sort of varied history, let's put it that way. That building is still there, and if anybody wants to help us plaque it, we'd really like to get it plaqued. They are both barracks from Fort Fisher. This is an early shot south from the pier, and I find it interesting that their plan for beach renourishment clearly involved a whole lot of pilings and trying to capture the sand that way. Turns out that doesn't work, and they've since gone to very much more high-tech ways to try to capture the sand, but there was at one point a belief that they could get the sand to build up that way. The CI Pavilion is on the corner, was across from Big Daddy's, right? On the corner of K and Fort Fisher Boulevard, at Fort Fisher Boulevard, right? Yeah. And so that's completely gone, but you can still see the pier, and you can still see K Street. And there's an early picture of Big Daddy's. Looks a little different than it does now. Also seems to have specialized in pizza, which is Big Daddy's Pizza. This is a grocery store. Brenda, where was this located? Do you remember? Where was it? Yeah.
On the right-hand side, across from where Jack Mackerel's is.
Okay. Yeah, where the convenience store is now. Mm-hmm. And this trading center was, this is a very iconic picture. You'll see lots of copies of this picture. That was my first job. Brenda says that was her first job. 35 cents an hour. Famous restaurant was Smitty's, which was in the Strip there on the right-hand side of K Street. This is a picture we have from the 50s and a copy of their menu. They were there for quite a long time. And fairly well known. Yeah, where the arcade is now. And this is Fundy's Cafe, another fine dining establishment. Brenda's grandparents, right, ran Fundy's, and that's their menu. You can see ham and eggs was 25 cents, bacon and eggs was 25 cents, barbecue was 25 cents. Anyway, that's Fundy's. Where was that located? Where was that located?
It was located where Jack Mackerel's is, more toward the pier. Is in that same area.
In that same strip.
Yeah.
But
and there was a grocery store right side of it.
Here's another real nice aerial photo. You can place things because of the curve. Yeah, whenever I look at aerial photos of Curry Beach, I kind of work from the big curve because, or from K Street. But that's what the cottages looked like in those days, a little bit different than today. I think our kids would be real interested in what Curry Beach housing looked like back then. There's another shot, aerial shot of the pier. and K Street. It really hasn't changed. It really, truly hasn't changed. Yeah, the water tower is, of course, gone now. But here's another aerial. This one's showing the pier. This is probably about the 70s. And a little bit more recent one. This is probably about the 90s. And you can see it's starting to fill in. This is the earliest, this Colonial Apartments is the earliest motel picture that I've found. You can see, and then the Curry Motel. Nelson's Motel, Lily's Cottages. Lily's was over there under the water tower. And Moran Motel. Does that look familiar to people? Of Stage and Screen.
Lily's Motel wound up changing to Palm Air, and now it's the cottages at Kure Beach.
Ah,
All people know what it was.
okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know that. And Wren's and Curry Key. Let's talk about the sad part. If you live at Curry Beach, you have to live with hurricanes. That picture on the right is actually at Wrightsville Beach, but I think it's an interesting look at the heights at which the hurricanes have come. You can see Hazel way up at the top, and then Floyd and Fran and Irene and Emily and Bonnie and Bertha. So you can get a sense of how high some of them have come. Of course, there was one in 1944, which did a significant amount of damage, both down here and on the Outer Banks. It's before they named hurricanes, so it's just called the Hurricane of 1944, because they didn't start naming hurricanes until the early 1950s. You can see the most damaging ones. These are some from the Hurricane of 44. We have some pictures, not a lot, but they did some significant damage. That's K Street. Hazel, that did by far the most damage. We have hundreds and hundreds of pictures of Hazel. This is the Pier house after Hurricane Hazel. And some other pictures. The one on the right is actually the Breakers, which was a big hotel. It was originally built for the workers at Dow Chemical Plant and was quite a big hotel, and its final demise was, it was finally done in by Hurricane Hazel. Bertha and Fran, we don't have as many pictures, particularly at Curry Beach. So if anybody's got pictures of Bertha and Fran damage from Curry Beach, we'd like to make a copy of them. You don't have to give them to us, just bring them to us and let us scan them, because we don't have very many pictures. We have some more at Carolina Beach, but poor Curry Beach didn't get as much photo coverage. Yeah. Okay, great. That'd be great. That'd be great. We'd like to have that. And the importance of Curry Beach. We have 3 state historic markers. We'd like to help people write, or will write with your help, more. We have one for Fort Fisher, obviously, one for the Dow Chemical Plant, and one for the modern Greece, which was the first of the blockade runners that the divers, Navy divers, found in the 1960s. It went down early in the war, and it went down completely intact. So there were thousands and thousands of artifacts, dishes and all kinds of things on it when it went down. It was fully laden, and went down. And so those are what the state currently has marked, but we'd be glad to find some other. K Street and the Pier, I think, should be written up as historic markers, certainly now that the Pier's 100 years old. So anyway, those are state historic markers. And we have put plaques on the Pier and on the Curry Cottage, which is on Atlantic, there by the ocean. Our newest plaque is going up on the Baker Simpson House, which is Old Hamby Beach. And they literally picked up their plaque yesterday, so it isn't on the building yet. And we are doing a drive to get more of those barracks marked with plaques. Since we know they all come from barracks, and we know that's more than 50 years old, we can plaque them fairly easily. And so we actually have 2 more Hamby Beaches in process. 2 more of the Hamby Beach cottages, we are currently processing their applications. So we're going to get more historic plaques down here, and we would love to get more. So anybody who has a cottage or a building that's over 50 years old, come see us, and we'll talk about getting a historic plaque on it. And I just thought this was an interesting combination. That's a billboard as you entered Curry Beach. You'll notice that the background is fairly wild and undeveloped. And of course, as you enter Curry Beach today, it's not wild or undeveloped. But I thought those are interesting combination of welcome to Curry Beach signs. So. And that's what I have.